100 hostages are still being held by Hamas. You're sending that negotiating team to Qatar in the coming days to talk about a potential deal, free hostages in exchange for a 6-week pause in fighting. As you know, Hamas is demanding the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for roughly 40 female hostages. Are you open to that? Are you close to a deal?
Well, time will tell, but Hamas's outlandish demands, and I'm not itemizing every one of them now, makes that deal a lot more difficult, but we're going to keep on trying because we want those hostages back. We understand also that the one thing that gets Hamas to give them is to give these hostages to us is the continued military pressure that we're applying there. So we're going to continue military pressure, and we're going to continue to try to get those hostages out. And we've succeeded already in bringing half of them out. I hope we continue along that same course.
I just want to add a little bit of sort of context to the way that the Biden administration is pushing back. Another way is that the U.S. intelligence community warned that, quote, distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public. And then back to the polls, you're talking about support for the idea of toppling Hamas. That makes perfect sense. There were other polls in Israel, 3 major Israeli television stations that said what Israelis also support are early elections. That's what I really want to focus on here is Senator Schumer not calling to sort of topple the government, but specifically says when the war winds down, will you commit to calling new elections? That's my question. Will you?
Dana, 2/3, first of all, what you said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end. We've just had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12
says, guided by
Channel 12 says 64% of Israelis support early elections.
But all polls show that's not. No, I'm afraid they asked them the question, do you support it during the war? And they said no.
But that's not what Schumer is calling for. He's calling for new elections when the war winds down.
Well, we'll see when we win the war. And until we win the war, I think Israelis understand that if we were to have elections now, before the war is won, resoundingly won, we would have at least 6 months of national paralysis, which means we would lose the war. If we don't win the war, we lose the war. And that would be not only a defeat for Israel, but a defeat for America too, because our victory is your victory. We're fighting these barbarians that are not merely threatening the survival of Israel,
when the war
but
winds
threatening
down?
everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when the war winds down?
I think that's something for the Israeli public to decide. But it's not something. No, look, that's something for the Israeli people to decide. I think it's ridiculous to talk about it. It's like after 9/11, after 9/11, you're in the midst of fighting the war against Al-Qaeda, and an Israeli would say, you know what we need now is either new elections in the U.S. or if your system doesn't allow, then President Bush should resign and we should have an alternative leader. You don't do that.
Well, let's
you don't
talk
do
about
that to
why.
A sister democracy, to an ally. You don't talk about that. What you do talk about is how do we help you defeat what President Biden called sheer evil. You don't just stop after you destroyed 80% of sheer evil. You destroy 100% of sheer evil to allow a different future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to talk about why
the sentiment has changed. I mean, obviously, there has been huge support and still is really big support here in the U.S. and most corners of the world for you doing what you are saying. Your strategic goal is to defeat Hamas and to make sure that that kind of terror attack doesn't happen again. But what is happening, and the reason why the world is shifting in public sentiment, is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Organizations call what they are seeing near famine in Gaza. So why won't you allow more food trucks to drive through the border crossings into Gaza to feed starving civilians while you continue to take out the terrorists in Hamas?
Well, our policy is to do exactly that. And in fact, we've enabled, our policy is to not to have famine, but to have the entry of humanitarian support as needed and as much as is needed. So we've created alternative routes, supply routes. We allow the dropping of the support from the air, humanitarian aid, a sea route that we've cooperated with, and it started yesterday, and alternative land routes that we're enabling again. The problem isn't getting the trucks in. The problem is that once they're getting in, they're looted by Hamas or looted by gangs. And what we're trying to do with some other powers is to try to get the aid to the actual civilians who need them and not looted by Hamas. That's really the problem.
Well,
in any case, that's our policy, and that's why I've enabled alternative routes of supply.
Okay. There's been a trickle, I mean, to be fair, of supply going in there. And every major NGO, outside organization involved with this crisis says that the level of hunger is life-threatening for hundreds of thousands. Cindy McCain, the McCain family, they have been long supporters of Israel. She is now the executive director of the World Food Program. She said that hunger has reached catastrophic levels in northern Gaza. People are dying. Only a fraction of the food needed is trickling. To prevent an outright famine, they need significant increase in humanitarian aid now. Millions of lives are at stake. Will you do that? Will you commit to that?
Of course, and we're doing it. Again, I've authorized alternative routes of supply. And again, the problem is not the number of trucks going in, although we're increasing it on a daily basis. I think the problem is preventing the looting by Hamas and by others. And that's what we're working on now. I think it's a cooperative effort. Our policy is to enable humanitarian aid. That's been a constant element in our whole program.